Where do you think you're going, Christopher Columbus? Page 70. Columbus, sick with malaria and running a high fever, had been left alone on shipboard. He could hear the battle, but when he cried out to his captains, there was no reply. He must have fainted, he reported later, and while unconscious, he seemed to hear a voice telling him not to be discouraged. Yes, he was an old man, the voice said, but he would still perform brave deeds. Good things still lay in store for him. This was a comfort to Columbus, but obviously no brave deeds were in order right then. What he and his men had to do now was to escape. Abandoning the fort, King Solomon's mine, and one ship stuck on a sandbar, Columbus set sail for Hispaniola, not even sure he could make it there. His ships had been so eaten by shipworms that they were falling apart, and indeed another ship had to be abandoned within a few days. For 2 months, the two remaining ships stumbled through the water while the men pumped and bailed, but on June 25th, when they reached the island of Jamaica, the ships could stay afloat no longer. The men ran them ashore and beached them close together, for this was where they would live. For how long? No one knew. They were marooned. Columbus was stranded on Jamaica for 1 year and 5 days. He spent most of that time trying to control his men, half of them mutinied, trying to keep peace with the natives, who supplied them with food, and feeling sorry for himself. At first, he had hoped for a quick rescue. Diego Mendez, a gentleman volunteer, had left in a native canoe in July for Hispaniola to bring help. But as summer turned into winter and winter into spring, Columbus decided that Diego had drowned on the way. What else could he think? He had no way of knowing that Diego had reached Hispaniola safely, but that the governor was in no hurry to help Christopher Columbus. He had no ship large enough that he could spare, he said, nor did he send one until June 1504. Columbus was 53 years old now, in poor health, and impatient to see the Queen. He still had brave deeds to perform, he wanted to tell her, but there were delays in Hispaniola. There was bad weather at sea. Columbus did not reach Spain until November 7th, 1504, and he never did see Queen Isabella. She died on November 26, 3 weeks after his arrival. His dream of brave deeds faded with the Queen's death. It was she who had supported him in the past, not the king, who had never shown much faith in him. Moreover, Columbus was in no condition now for brave deeds. Many days he was too crippled with arthritis even to get out of bed, so he concentrated instead on trying to collect the rewards he felt were his due. He had become a wealthy man over the years, receiving a portion of profits from the Indies, but it was not as large a portion as had been agreed upon, he insisted. He wanted his original contract with the king and queen fulfilled. Only in this way, he believed, would his success be officially acknowledged. He spent much of his time petitioning the king and complaining. He and his friend, Amerigo Vespucci, would get together and deplore the fate of explorers. How unappreciated they were, how neglected. Certainly Columbus had performed brave deeds, but not even he could appreciate the extent of his achievement. Until the day he died, May 20th, 1506, he refused to revise his geography, although by this time others were questioning it. A pilot on Columbus's second voyage drew a map showing Colba as an island, but Columbus insisted to the end that it was China. He had gone to find the Indies, he said, and he'd found them. After his death, explorers picked up where Columbus left off, and a true picture of the world slowly began to emerge. In 1513, Balboa crossed those few miles at Panama and claimed the Pacific Ocean for Spain. In 1520, near the tip of South America, Ferdinand Magellan found the waterway that Columbus had failed to find on his fourth voyage. Although Magellan did not survive his expedition, one of his original 5 ships arrived in Spain in 1522, having actually completed the trip around the world that Columbus had planned. When Magellan's men told their story, it was obvious that the world was much bigger than anyone supposed. Whereas Columbus had figured it was 2,400 miles from the Canary Islands to Japan, it was actually 10,000. Indeed, Columbus's world was 25% smaller than the real world, and there was 55% more water in the world than he had figured. With such information, it became increasingly clear that all that land between Europe and Asia must be a new world, previously unknown to Europeans. Columbus would have been upset to hear this news. He was convinced that he knew the secrets of the world and he didn't like to be wrong. The last thing that he had wanted to do was to discover a new world. The end. Here are the notes at the end of the book. From page 10, Columbus was born sometime between August 25th and October 31st, but it was the custom then to celebrate the feast day of a person's patron saint rather than his own birthday. St. Christopher's feast day is June 25th. Christopher had 3 younger brothers and a younger sister. His brother Bartholomew worked with him in the map store in Portugal. In 1494, he joined Christopher in Hispaniola and took an active part in the government. Christopher's youngest brother, Diego, accompanied him on his second and third voyages. The Turks were Mohammedans, followers of the Prophet Muhammad, as Christians are followers of Christ. Mohammedans in the Mideast held the holy city of Jerusalem, which for centuries the Christians had been trying to recapture. In 1453, the Turks captured Constantinople, where the trade routes to the east met. Now they were able to control overland traffic. From page 14. A nautical, or sea mile, is approximately 800 feet longer than a land mile. Marco Polo really did have fabulous experiences in China, but he never went to Japan, and his description is inaccurate and based on hearsay. From page 17. While Columbus was in Spain, he met Beatriz Enriquez de Jarana, the daughter of a peasant. Since Columbus was dealing with royalty, he did not think it suitable to marry Beatrice, yet he remained devoted to her throughout his life. Their son, Ferdinand, was born in 1488. In 1494, both of Christopher's sons, Diego and Ferdinand, became pages at the Spanish court. Ferdinand went with his father on his last voyage and later wrote a biography of him. From page 24, the Sargasso Sea, east of the West Indies, is noted for the abundance of Gulf weed on its surface. Page 26. Columbus's reckoning of distance was not accurate on this trip. The figures he gave the sailors happened to be closer to the true distance than the record he kept for himself. Page 31. The natives Columbus saw throughout his travels were usually naked, although on some islands they wore loincloths. On his last voyage, he found natives who also wore bandanas. Page 33. When the Spaniards asked questions, the natives probably nodded or said just what they thought the Spaniards wanted to hear. Of course, there were no dog-headed or other strange-looking people in the Indies. Sir John Mandeville told sensational and untrue stories because he wanted his book to be read. 40. Actually, this king was a head chief, or cacique, who ruled northwestern Haiti. 50. The Spaniards used these dogs with great success in fighting natives. One dog, they said, was equal to 8 men. The natives were also terrified of horses. When they saw a man on horseback, they thought it was all one animal. 56. Before leaving Isabella, Columbus ordered that a new city be built on a more suitable site to replace the old one. The new city, begun in 1496 or 97, was called Santo Domingo. It was here that Columbus was denied the right to land during the hurricane. The island that Columbus called Hispaniola is now divided into 2 countries, Haiti in the west, the Dominican Republic in the east. Columbus dressed in a monk's robe for the rest of his life. Page 60. Columbus's enemies represented him as a tyrant, but even his friends agreed that Columbus was an indiscreet, tactless, and unsuccessful governor. The Spaniards, whom Bobadilla saw hanging, however, were indeed guilty of leading a rebellion. 75. Columbus's Garden of Eden continent was given the name America in 1507, just a year after his death. A French geographer had read an account of Amerigo Vespucci's visit to this continent. This account, however, was falsely dated 1497, a year before Columbus's visit, instead of 1499 when it actually took place. So the geographer gave Vespucci the credit for the discovery and wrote America on the new map he was making. 76. When one speaks of the discovery of America, one is taking the European point of view from which this story is told. Strictly speaking, of course, Native Americans discovered the New World thousands of years before. Between times, the Vikings came, perhaps the Phoenicians, perhaps sailors from other countries. These were separate trips and had no lasting effect on history. Columbus's voyages, however, set off a wave of exploration that changed the world forever. He deliberately crossed an ocean that few people thought could be crossed, and luckily, he was a magnificent seaman. The end.